Welcome back to Talk to Me on Rogers TV. And our next guest is Dr. Kofi Hope. And he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's a community activist, youth advocate, and we want to welcome you to Talk to Me.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, we're going to talk about the Center for Young Black Professionals, right? But your PhD, Dr. Hope, is in political science.
That's correct.
And
yes.
we've been bristling on Talk to Me about doing a Trump segment. And I wonder if we can start talking with you about that. What are your views on the impact that Donald Trump is having globally? Are we supposed to care what's going on in Canada? Talk to me.
Yeah, I think it's quite relevant here. I mean, one of the more disturbing parts is, let's be honest, racists feel emboldened with Donald Trump as a president of the United States. So we see that whether it's bomb threats towards the Jewish community, whether it's the fact that we've had protesters outside of a mosque in Toronto. We had a firebomb attempt at a mosque in Toronto. We've had folks kind of all across both Canada and the Western world in general feeling emboldened to say things that they kept in the dark, in the closet before because of that. I think that's one of the major concerns. The second one, to me, is the effect he's having around perceptions of the media. Now, I think the media certainly has its problems, but the way in which he's kind of attacked media and fake news and delegitimized journalism as a profession, I think is also having profound effects, both in America and here in Canada.
Do you think that part of his, I guess, strategy is deflection? For example, he comes out with, he just says things right off the cuff. He uses, one of his most recent, he's using President Obama. Nothing is actually backed. What's your take on that? Is it just deflection? Is he just trying to keep people distracted? Or do you think there's some truth to any of this? Or should he be, if he's going to say something, should he be backing it up?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know if there is a strategy there, what's coming just off the cuff. But I try never to underestimate someone, especially someone like Trump. I think part of it is it's kind of a shock and awe campaign, to use that term from the old Gulf War, is he just continues to overwhelm and bombard people with so much stuff that it kind of just lowers the bar, right? You know, one of the things Donald Trump has said would have ended the career of any other politician and shocked the public. But he says these things every day, multiple times, to the point you get numb to it. People just get tired of Trump. But he's still there, he's still moving his agenda forward. But he just overwhelms people with outrageous comments to the point that we all just stop listening, and that's the most dangerous part.
Right. How do you feel about him pulling Obamacare and trying to come up with something to provide for these millions of people who are on Obamacare?
Well, I mean, he hasn't pulled it yet, right?
Yeah.
And the way that, U.S. Congress is set up is it's not going to be an easy road, right? Already, the plan that they're putting forward, other people within the party have said, oh, it doesn't go far enough. Some people have said it's gone too far. I think it's going to be a real mess, and it may be stretch over the year. It may stretch even longer before they're able to figure something out. It's quite easy to tear a law down, but what they need to put in that place, and the fact that millions of people have coverage and would lose it, means they have to put something there. And there they don't really have a plan. So I think it's a horrible move he's taking, but I don't think it's something that can actually happen as easily as he thinks. I think it's going to cause a lot of chaos, and I think the Republicans will be fighting amongst themselves for a long time before they decide on an alternative.
Right. And of course, the ban on immigrants from the 7 Muslim countries, now he's broken that down to 6 right now. What's the implication for, because I understand now the Canadians who are here, who are permanent residents from here in Canada, but have passports from another country, will have problems getting into America. What kind of firestorm is that in terms of for Canadians?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in that the power a customs officer has when you're kind of standing in that line is more so than really in almost any other context in our democracy, right? We've had people sent back. I read a report, someone was sent back told, well, you need a visa to come from Canada, which isn't true, but it's 100% at the discretion of that customs agent, and they have no obligation to report why they sent someone back. So the fact is, even there's what the letter of the law says, but then there's also how that gets interpreted by the guards, where many times it can just be blatant prejudice, racism, discrimination. And it's kind of given them carte blanche to act on those things with this new first travel ban and now the second one that's coming out. So the implication, I think, is for many folks, I would be concerned if you're trying to cross the border because they have a right to look at your Facebook, They have a right to look at posts. They have a right to look at what you've said on Twitter. And then it's up to that discretion of that one person to decide whether you can enter or not.
Yeah, what do you think? What is the Trump agenda? What is that? Do you have do you have a take on what that could be?
Well, I think there's the Trump agenda, which is Donald Trump, and that's been. I mean, he's made a career out of building his name as a brand and kind of self-aggrandizement of just building himself. But I think there's also the Stephen Bannen agenda, right? His main policy advisor, which is much more sinister, which is kind of a hard right agenda to deconstruct government, which is a kind of anti-Muslim, anti-Islam agenda, and which is, frankly, I think, a racist agenda, kind of a white nationalist agenda. And I think those two are not one in the same, but are clearly there. Within that, I think there's many people within his administration who have their own agendas. So I think most of them are negative, but it's interesting that already early on we're seeing that infighting between these different agendas, but a lot of it is self-interest.
Yeah.
They seem to be the opposite of what you stand for and your organization in terms of community. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of community and building young leaders.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my favorite sayings, I spent a little bit of time in Southern Africa, and there's a saying that comes from there, Ubuntu, and it means I am because we are. The idea that we don't exist as individuals, we exist as part of a community. And I think that's obvious. You know, I have a young daughter, and when a child is born, they can't do anything on their own. They're so reliant on their parents. And as we get older, sometimes we forget that, but that we are still products of our community. And so for me, you know, what we do at CEE, as you rightly said, is in opposition to that Trump agenda, because it's an agenda that says we only rise together.
Yes.
And those who have been sometimes pushed to the margins, those who have been stigmatized, and in our case it's, you know, young black men and women who live in certain stigmatized communities, that they are as much part of the fabric of Canada as anyone else. And their success is tied into all of our success. That's the message we have in everything we do.
So, to that point, the organization focuses on aiding and encouraging young professionals from 18 to 29. And it seems nowadays, even though people have their degrees, some have masters, PhDs, and it's getting really hard for people to get hired for a full-time job with benefits and things like that. A lot of young entrepreneurs are on the come up. So what sort of advice do you give to young professionals trying to develop a successful business?
Well, for a successful business, and with the folks we're looking at, we're focusing on a very specific population. So young men and women who self-identify as black, who face major barriers to entering the labor market, whether that may have been previous conflict with the law, whether that may have been lack of access to post-secondary education or even secondary education, being young parents. And so for them, when it comes to businesses, what we talk about is the philosophy of a side hustle. We say, you know, if you're 22 years old at the beginning of your career, living in a community that hasn't necessarily been connected to entrepreneurship or business, etc., to just go all in on a business right now is probably not the wisest thing to do. Not when about 80 to 90% of startups in Canada fail. Not when most companies take 3 years to turn a profit. What we say is focus on a job, focus on education, and build a business at the same time. You kind of have to walk and chew gum in this day and age. And you can start that business, and we say, you are your first angel investor. That 9 to 5 you get will give you the income to start building that company, build it slowly. You know, Mark Zuckerberg's and the other folks, those are exceptions to the rule. Most folks build in an industry, build their professional network, their connections, understand what value they can bring, and then go full-time into their business. So our advice really is, pause, that's a great idea, that's an amazing dream, let's build it. But let's also realize that there's a process to this, that you don't have to do it by 25 or you've failed, that you actually have a long career ahead of you, and it's about making strategic moves and building it. And so for us, the philosophy of side hustle is at the heart of what we preach around entrepreneurship.
Do the hustle, baby. Kofi, what are some of the internal problems we have to get over? For instance, I hardly see a Buy Black campaign by the business associations out there. That there's all that talk that, for instance, unlike some other communities, when the dollar comes into the black community, it goes out very quickly. It doesn't circulate and build wealth. We don't have that kind of generational wealth where, you know, you get that big money from trust fund from your father and grandfather and so on. At the same time, 18 to 20 something, that's one of the most despised demographics for young black men. They're stopped by the police all the time. What are some of the problems internally in relation to professionalism and business that we ourselves have to get over?
Well, I think you spoke about a few of them. I think for the young people we work with, one of them is around exposure, right? We're based within Toronto. We work with a focus on certain so-called priority neighborhoods and now neighborhood improvement areas. But they're areas that are really outside of the wealth and opportunity of the downtown core. And many of the young people there, their experiences outside of their community, within those areas of prosperity with the gleaming condos downtown, is not something that happens very often. And so a big part of what we do is expose people outside of your network. We say to them, your network is your net worth. And especially in a diverse, multicultural society.
And we want to take a little pause on that cultural mosaic that you're creating there. And we will be back on Talk to Me right after this.